works to work very big in this semester. Do you work more in this semester?
No, not too much. I have not many hours, not many teaching hours. I have 2 courses.
I found 2 your monographs. Did you write any more?
Not about Cohen. I have a new book about Michel Henry. You can find yes, you can find it online. No. About the soul in Michel Henry, but unfortunately it is in Italian.
In Italian lingua.
Italian, yes.
Italian lingua. Good. Thank you very much for your participant in our seminar. I must see what about our participants, my students, aspirants, and so on. Good Walter. Buongiorno. It's very I am very glad to see you, good Walter. It's very very good to you with us now. Да, Настя, начинай. We must start, dear colleague, and dear young and not very young colleague. Yeah, we start our work and we continue our seminar named German and Russian Neukantianism, and I would like to introduce our today's speaker. Dr. Ezio Gamba is a lecturer at the Faculty of Theology of Northern Italy. Ezio Gamba graduated from the Faculty of Philosophy of the University of Turin with a dissertation on music in the aesthetics of Hermann Cohen. He is a member of the Hermann Cohen Gesellschaft, the Italian Association for the Study of Philosophy and Theology, the Italian Philosophical Society, the Italian Association for Aesthetic Research. He is a member of editorial staff of Spazio Filosofico, the Turin edition of Estetica. He is graduated from the Conservatory of Cuneo hautboy class and the Turin Conservatory class of composition. All of his major publications are dedicated to Cohen's aesthetic. I found 2 monographs in Italian. Il problema del raffigurazione del divino nell'estetica di Hermann Cohen and la legalità del sentimento puro, l'estetica di Hermann Cohen come modello di una filosofia della cultura. Ezio is an active out of our magazine, our journal, Ruden Journal of Philosophy, for which I am especially grateful to him. He published one article 2 years ago, and in the last issue of this journal magazine, he published the article named The Artistic Representation of Jesus in Hermann Cohen's Aesthetics. And now Ezio will present the theme, the report about the problem of individuality in Hermann Cohen's Aesthetics. I must say that it is the importance and difficult, of course, theme in the Cohen's philosophy, and this problem connects with the problem of all system of philosophy, and especially with the philosophy of religion in Cohen's philosophy, because I know that this report, this session will be very, very interesting. Nun, Ezio, please, your talk.
Thank you very much. And can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. I thank very much Professor Belov for this invitation. And as he told you, the topic is the problem of individuality in Hermann Cohen's aesthetics. As is well known, Franz Rosenzweig devoted particular attention to the problem of individuality in Hermann Cohen's philosophy, and to the overcoming of every concept of individuality we can find in Cohen's System der Philosophie by the more authentic individuality of the human being of religion, the Mensch der Religion. Regarding this topic, Rosenzweig stated in his introduction to Cohen's Jüdische Schriften that the need to deepen the problem of individuality led Cohen, after writing the third part of his System der Philosophie, to write 2 books about religion instead of his planned work about philosophical psychology. So Hermann Cohen planned to write a system of philosophy, a System der Philosophie, in 4 parts that are logic, ethics, aesthetics, and philosophical psychology. But he never wrote the last part of the system. In his last years, in the last years of his life, he wrote, instead of this psychology, he wrote 2 books about philosophy of religion, 2 books that are Der Begriff der Religion im System der Philosophie and Religion der Vernunft. But those books are not a 4th part of the System der Philosophie. The 4th part remained to be written. Rosenzweig's thesis is that Cohen did so because he was led to write these books about religion from the need to deepen his concept of individuality. The concept of individuality we can find in Cohen's books about religion is more deeper and more authentic than the concept of individuality we can find in every part of the system of philosophy, and above all in aesthetics, that is the part of the system where the problem is of individuality is particularly analyzed. Rosenzweig writes that in comparison with the individuality of the human being of religion, an individuality that is found on the correlation with God, I quote, "The human being about which aesthetic knew fades now in all its aesthetic individuality to a mere type." So if we compare it with the human being of religion, the individuality of the human being that is represented by art shrinks, fades to a mere type that is not an authentic individual, but a representation of a general, of a universal concept through a seemingly individual figure. Rosenzweig's statement is actually based on Cohen's writings about aesthetics and about religion. In the last part of his System der Philosophie, that is Ästhetik des reinen Gefühls, that was published in 1912, Cohen explicitly maintains that the human being that is the object of artistic representation or the character of a work of literature is not a type, but rather an individual. Just 3 years later, however, in his first book about the philosophy of religion, Der Begriff der Religion im System der Philosophie, that was published in 1915, Cohen states that the human being that is represented by art is not really an individual. Only the human being of religion is really individual. The human being represented by art, or the character of a work of literature, is merely a type. So, in 1912, in his book about aesthetics, he states that the human being represented by art is truly individual. 3 years later, in his first book about philosophy of religion, Der Begriff der Religion, he states, on the contrary, that the human being represented by art is not truly individual, but it is a type. This statement by Cohen is not accompanied by an acknowledgement that an explicit recantation of his previous view is necessary. Cohen doesn't claim to correct his positions of 3 years earlier. Cohen doesn't write something like, in my aesthetics, I wrote that the human being represented by art is truly individual, but I was wrong, I have to change my view. Nothing similar. On the contrary, he states that, quotation, "The aesthetic analysis of the true object in the work of art is sufficient to teach us that this object can't be an individual, but rather merely a type." End of quotation. So, does Cohen refer to his own aesthetic analysis, which he presented in his own aesthetic writings, and above all in Ästhetik des reinen Gefühls? The hypothesis that Cohen refers to some different analysis from the ones that are exposed in his writings would look extremely unlikely. But in Ästhetik des reinen Gefühls, the individuality of the human being represented by art is explicitly maintained. On the other hand, if we suppose that Cohen, since the publication of Aesthetic des reinen Gefühls, developed his own aesthetic thought, and that, on this not secondary point, he went beyond his thesis presented in Aesthetic des reinen Gefühls, we have to acknowledge that there is no trace of this development in Cohen's published writings. In Cohen's writings that have been published after Aesthetic des reinen Gefühls, after 1912, there is no trace of a recantation of Cohen's consideration about aesthetics and above all about this problem of individuality. And above all, we have to acknowledge that we don't find any word about this development in Hermann Cohen's summary of Aesthetics des reinen Gefühls, that makes up the first part of his essay about Mozart, published in 1916, 1 year after Der Begriff der Religion. Yes, in 1916, Cohen published a small book about Mozart, and the first part of this small book was a summary of his main thesis in Aesthetics des reinen Gefühls. So, if there were a recantation, a changing of view of Cohen's thesis in aesthetic, clearly we should find it here in this book about Mozart, but we don't find it. Should we think that Cohen's statements in Der Begriff der Religion are the result of a mere mistake or inconsistency by Cohen? In this talk, my aim is to argue for the thesis that the statement we read in Der Begriff der Religion, according to which the human being represented by art is a type, and the statement we read in Aesthetic des reinen Gefühls, according to which the human being represented by art is truly individual, belong to different levels or to different points of view, and therefore they don't contradict one another. According to this thesis, the aesthetic analysis would show us that from an aesthetic point of view, from a strictly aesthetic point of view, the human being represented by art has to be considered as truly individual. But the systematic overview that is adopted in Der Begriff der Religion can teach us that the individuality of the human being represented by art can't be maintained from a different point of view than the aesthetic one. So these two statements that seem to be contradictory are not really in contradiction because they belong to different point of view, to different levels. This is my thesis in this talk. To understand this thesis, let's examine Cohen's considerations about the individuality of the object of artistic representation in Aesthetic des reinen Gefühls. Here, Cohen asks whether the human being we see in a painting or the character of a literary work is a representation of the concept of human being, whether it is authentic individual or whether it is rather a type. So three possibility. First, the human being represented by art is the representation of the universal concept of the human being. Second possibility, it is truly individual. Third possibility, it is a type, that is a universal represented by a single figure that expresses a character in an eminent way. The character can be the lover, the poor man, the rich man, the hero, and so on. The first of these three possibilities that is the possibility that the human being represented by art is a representation of the universal concept of the human being, is immediately rejected because it surely doesn't fit the experience we have of works of art. In addition, the hypothesis according to which the human being represented in a painting or described in a work of literature is a type is unsatisfactory when we confront it with real works of art and with the experience we have of these works. Certainly, in these works, we find representations and characters that are just types. But could characters such as Hamlet or Faust be considered to be types? In comparison with the strong individuality of these characters, types seem to be relegated to the role of secondary characters, and an art that represents figures as just types seems to be failed art. Thus, it appears necessary that the human being represented by art is authentically individual. However, this need seems to be contradicted by a serious problem. It could seem that every artistic representation of an object is founded on the knowledge of the represented object itself. So if I have to represent an object, I have to know what it is like. If I have to represent a human being, I have to know what is a human being like. I have to know anatomy and so on. Cohen's critical idealism, however, denies the possibility of knowledge of individual objects, because all knowledge as products of thought as its objects, and products of thought as concepts are always in principle universal. So the individual has no different meaning or role than the role of a limit concept of knowledge. Knowledge stands in its polarity of direction toward two different ideals limits: the law of all phenomena and the complete determination of the individual. Every supposedly individual object is actually universal as a product of thought. We can always take another step to the determination of the individual without ever reaching it. It is like an horizon. The knowledge we have of a human being is always conceptual, so it is knowledge of universals. It could seem, at first sight, that sensation could overcome this problem. The perceived individual, indeed, doesn't seem having a merely conceptual existence. We can think, okay, when we think about a human being, that is conceptual knowledge, so it is conceptual of a universal object. But when we see a human being, he is individual. However, it is necessary to remember that objects of sensation, in Cohen's idealism, are not independent from thought. On the contrary, they are products that have their origin in thought itself. So sensation too, as a factor of knowledge, has no individual objects. If we think we can overcome the impossibility of thinking an individual object by pointing a finger at it, we put ourselves outside of the field of knowledge. So in Cohen's idealism, even sensation has not individual objects. But if the individual can't be an object of knowledge, how can art represent it? Can art succeed in representing an individual object that can't be an object of knowledge? We have now to recall the fact that the production of the human figure, that is the object of artistic representation, is not founded on knowledge, but on pure feeling. The representation of a human being as founded just on pure knowledge is not art, is a kind of image for handbooks of anatomy. The artistic representation of human beings is founded on pure feeling, that is pure love for the human being. It is pure feeling in its psychological interpretation as love for the human being to produce this figure. At the same time, however, artistic representation can't do without conceptual knowledge, which is an essential precondition of art. Cohen, here too, reminds us that all the contents of consciousness in general, when we don't restrict ourselves to reflections about knowledge alone, are not mere conceptual constructions, because an axis of relative feeling are always essential to them. Cohen points out that we can't think that our acquaintance with people around us or with familiar landscapes is mere conceptual knowledge, and so necessarily knowledge of universal. Our acquaintance with these objects can't be reduced to conceptual knowledge, but it has a fundamental affective component. Our acquaintance with people around us and with familiar places and so on is not only conceptual knowledge. It has always an affective component. This affective component is what, according to Cohen, makes this acquaintance able to have real individual objects. The object of conceptual thought is necessarily universal, but the object of feeling is necessarily individual. Certainly, this consideration about common experience can't be considered as a proof to found the individuality of the object of art, because the common experience of acquaintance between people is not a fact of culture that could act as material for real transcendental reflection. So, in Cohen's thought, transcendental philosophy has the task to give a foundation for facts of culture, like science, law, art, and so on, not to everyday experience, but our acquaintance of people around us and familiar places and so on is everyday experience. So it can be used to prove anything in transcendental philosophy. Certainly, this consideration about common experience can't be considered as a proof to found individuality of the objects of art. Rather, this consideration is just a reminder that convincingly points out how abstract, unilateral, and insufficient is to consider the contents of consciousness on the mere base of their conceptual content. Thus, the possibility of the artistic representation or literary description of individuals is also the possibility that pure feeling, that is the foundation of artistic creation, and conceptual thought as a precondition of artistic creation, reach a unitary expression. In this unitary expression, however, pure feeling has to play the role of the only foundation. The last chapter of the first volume of Aesthetic Design Gefühls is indeed devoted, in its paragraphs about language and poetry, to explaining the possibility of this unitary expression that is founded in pure feeling. In artistic representation of a human being, we have the unitary expression of our conceptual knowledge about the human being, and of pure feeling. But these two elements have not the same role. Conceptual knowledge is a precondition, but the only real, only authentic fundament for artistic representation is pure feeling. Now, we can actually consider how, in Der Begriff der Religion, just 3 years later, Cohen denies authentic individuality to the human being that is represented in works of art. First of all, we have to underscore that in Der Begriff der Religion, Cohen never presents reflections that have the individual represented by art as their main topic. The individual represented by art is always considered by Cohen in Der Begriff der Religion in comparison with the individual that, in correlation with God, makes up the content of religion. So in Der Begriff der Religion, there is no strict aesthetic analysis of the individuality of the human being represented by art, but there is this topic is recalled only in order to compare it with the human being of religion. The aim of this comparison is to distinguish between religious love and aesthetic love. And this distinction is the main aim of this chapter of Der Begriff der Religion, devoted to the relation between religion and aesthetics. As such, the individuality of the human being that is represented by art is denied only in comparison with the more authentic individuality of the human being of religion, of the individual in correlation with God. So, from the point of view of this comparison, Rosenzweig's statement that was quoted at the beginning of this talk really seems to hit the mark. Rather than a simple denial of the individuality of the human being that is represented by art, we have an overcoming of the individuality of the subject by the more authentic individuality of the human being of religion. This individuality, according to Cohen, is more authentic as a consequence of the fact that religious love, unlike aesthetic love, considers the human being in its correlation with God. From the point of view of religion, the single human being, in its correlation with God, should never be considered as subordinated to any universal concept, not even to the couple composed by the nature of the human being and the human being of nature. That is a couple of concepts that are really important for aesthetics, for Cohen's aesthetics. Because of that, Cohen writes that the human being of religion is absolutely individual. Absolutely here is Schlachting, without other qualification. Only in comparison with this more authentic or absolute individuality does Cohen use the word type to define the human being that is represented by art. Cohen uses the word type only in comparison with this more authentic individual. Certainly, this interpretation is a serious problem. Can we say that an individual is less individual than another? Individuality doesn't seem to be a quantifiable property, so it is unlikely that we can compare two objects to determine which of them is the more individual. However, it is necessary to clarify that the comparison between the human being represented by art and the human being of religion is not a comparison between two objects, but rather between two different determinations of the individuality. Cohen does not compare them, the human being represented by art and the human being of religion, like two objects, and so it tells this one is more individual than the other. This doesn't make sense. but it compares two different determinations of the individual, two different ways to determine the individual. Cohen's thesis, therefore, is that the religious determination of individuality is a more authentic determination of individuality than the aesthetic one. Even from this point of view, however, we seem to find a mere repetition of the same problem. Can we say that the determination of individuality is better or more authentic than another? To meet this objection, it is useful to recall that the individual, that is the object of artistic representation, always has a universal value, because pure feeling produces the represented human being as an ideal of the individual. This is fully evident when the human being is represented without consideration of its historical or contingent features, as in Greek kouroi. But it is the same in regard to the representation of an individual that is determined by historical or other contingent features. All these features, indeed, belong to the field of knowledge, so they don't undermine the ideal value found in the pure feeling of the human being represented by art. The individual represented by art, therefore, is not a type. It has the universal represented by a seemingly human individual figure, but rather an individual endowed with universal or ideal value. It is different. Perhaps we can therefore state that Cohen, in comparing the human being represented by art with the human being of religion, uses the word type to state this double value, individual and universal or ideal, of the human being represented by art, even if this use of the word type is not fully correct, and it is contradictory with Cohen's own statements in aesthetic design fields. An analogous universal value should not be considered when it comes to the human being of religion. That has to be conceived only singularly in its correlation with God. The individuality of the human being of religion is therefore absolute individuality. From this point of view, the human being produced by artistic representation, for its universal value, appears, in comparison with the absolute individuality of the human being of religion, to be similar to the type, even if it is not a type. Types, indeed, are not really individual. Actually, in the quotation from Der Begriff der Religion I cited above, Cohen denies that the human being represented by art is an individual. Regarding this clear denial, Der Begriff der Religion and aesthetic Gefühls seem to be in explicit contradiction. It is on this specific topic, however, that my aim is to explain that the opposite statements we read in those works by Cohen belong to different points of view, so they don't really contradict each other. How can Cohen deny that the individual that is the object of artistic representation is authentically individual? He can deny that because the human being represented by art is not even a true human being. Art is always illusion, fiction. This concept of art as illusion is already expressed in aesthetic Gefühls, but it seems to become crucial for the problem of the individuality of the object of artistic representation in Der Begriff der Religion. The human being represented by art is not a true human being, but rather an illusion. So its individuality is the individuality of an illusion, contrary to the human being of religion. The human being represented by art is therefore only individual for aesthetic consciousness, in artistic creation and in aesthetic erlebnis, that is the aesthetic experience that is among the essential topics of philosophical aesthetics. Adopting a different point of view, a point of view external to aesthetics, as the systematic overview adopted in the Begriff der Religion, where Cohen's aim is to examine the specificity of religion in relation to the system of philosophy as a whole and to each of its directions. So, adopting a different point of view, it is, however, necessary to acknowledge that the individual human being represented by art is just illusion, whereas its universal or ideal value is authentic. So, even if Cohen's use of the word type in Der Begriff der Religion is not fully correct, because the individual value of the human being represented by art is located in a sphere of illusion. It is not denied from every point of view. Despite this not fully correctness of the use of the word type by Cohen in the Begriff der Religion, his use of the word type can be justified. This doesn't change the fact, however, that from a strictly aesthetic point of view, it has in philosophical reflections about the foundation of aesthetic consciousness, of artistic creation, and of aesthetic erlebnis, the attribution of individuality to the human being, represented by art, remains completely valid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the talk. Yes, we have time for the question or for replic or for discussion. I themselves think that Cohen's aesthetic is a bridge from the traditional philosophical system to the philosophy of religion. It's Cohen's aesthetics showed the incompleteness of the traditional philosophical system, showed the three traditional parts of this system, logic, ethic, and aesthetic, is not enough for complete. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. What do you think about this? This my replic, Ezio?
Here's the microphone. Yes, but I think it is also Rosenzweig thesis true. I don't know. It is a problem. So traditional systems had an aesthetics, but no, I think no one except Cohen and Jonas Cohen in New Kantianism wrote a true aesthetic. No, so perhaps it's true. No? What are your when you speak of the incompleteness of a traditional system? What kind of system do you think of? The microphone, perhaps. I don't hear.
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry. Of course, Kant's system it's as typical system of philosophy system, and from this time, this view was the general views in philosophical area, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so.
Yes, I think so. So I think probably in Cohen's thought, according to Cohen, in Kant there is a foundation of an aesthetics. Yes, no, he wrote a book, Kant's Begründung der Ästhetik, but perhaps after the foundation of the aesthetic there is not an aesthetic, because Kant still lacked a precise reference to a fact of culture, that is art. So in Kant's thought, the question of beauty is referred both to art and to nature without a preference. So in this way, probably yes, there is a foundation of aesthetic, but there is no real aesthetic. Perhaps it's too much. It is too much to say this, but.
Good, thanks. I can ask our participants, if you have any question, please say. We put on microphone and please.
Володя,
Майя.
Да, у меня есть вопрос, но я никак с этим скайпом не разберусь. Меня сейчас слышно?
Да, очень хорошо тебя слышно.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I have probably one remark, but it's also a question, and so I have a lot of questions. So my first question is, if I may, my first question is, I don't see a contradiction between Cohen's concepts of the individual and a type. Yeah, these two concepts. Why? I think the concept of individual in his system of philosophy has a systematical meaning and systematical place. And for example, in the Logik der reinen Erkenntnis, in the Ethik des reinen Willens, and in the Aesthetic des reinen Gefühls, Cohen develops three types of subject. Yeah, the three types of subject. The first one is, as he says, das Ich-Bewusstsein des Begriffs. So it's a theoretical, it's a theoretical subject. It's a cognitive subject, and for this subject is the consciousness of consciousness of a concept is a main feature. Yeah, in the ethic. We have another type of a subject. It's an ethical subject, and it's constituted as all Einheit, yeah, all Einheit, or all yes, all unity or something like this. It's an Allheit, yeah, Allheit or all unity. I don't know how to translate it. It means it's moral. It's a moral subject. And now we have the aesthetic of poor feeling, and here we have a third concept of a subject, and it's a subject as individual. Yeah, it's the only sphere where we deal with an individual. Yeah, and so it's of course this individual is represented in the masterpieces as a type. Yeah, it's correct. Yeah, but the type is here not a deduction. Yeah, not a product of abstraction, but type is to think. I believe as an exemplar. Yeah, it's. That means the general will be exemplified. Yeah, will be exemplified. The general is represented through the individual. Yeah, this is so. It's not a I don't see it's a contradiction. Yeah, between these two concepts. Individual is an individual is here a representative of a general. Yeah, and in this sense we should understand the type. Yeah, and so if we think so, then we can't say that the individual of the art is an individual of illusion. It's still the real individual, and still a real individual who is a representative of art, yeah, or of species or something like this. It's my first question. What do you think about it? And the second one is so concerns your understanding of knowledge. Yeah, knowledge, and so I would say. Yeah, in the art there is a special kind of knowledge. It's kind of psychological knowledge, which Cohen called Einfühlung. Yeah, Einfühlung. So this I don't know how it's in English.
Empathy.
Feeling into, yeah, feeling into.
Empathy.
Yeah, empathy. Yeah, okay, empathy. Okay, of course. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, empathy. Yeah, it's empathy. It's a special art of aesthetic cognition. Yeah, and so probably, yeah, because cognition is not also a conceptual cognition or discursive cognition. It's also a cognition via or per this empathy. Yeah, it's Einfühlung. Yeah, it's aesthetic form of cognition. So it's just yeah, just my additions, and I'm interested and wondering what do you think about it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. So first, for the first question, I completely agree with you that the problem of individuality, that individuality of the subject, that in Cohen's aesthetic, before the individuality of the represented object, more fundamental of the represented object, or the individuality of the human being that is representing in the painting. The question is more fundamental, the individuality of aesthetic self, of aesthetic consciousness itself. And it is true, Cohen states that the individuality, the difference between ethical subject and aesthetical subject is that ethical subject is allness, allight, it is the mankind, and the aesthetical subject is an individual subject.
Mm-hmm.
And that the individuality of the human being that is represented by art is a second step, derived individuality of the individuality of the aesthetic consciousness, of the aesthetic self. However, on this level, on the level that of the human being represented by art, of the human being as an object of artistic representation, Cohen explicitly opposes individual and type. To say that the human being represented by art is individual and not a type, when it is not a type, it is not a type. Why does he oppose these two kinds of conceive the human being represented by art? Probably, also clearly, he doesn't consider the type as a true individual. Type is a figure like in art, the lover, the hero, the poor man. It's not a true individual. He is a representative of a universal concept that has no real individuality beyond this role. And he states that, on the contrary, artistic representation is representation of individuals like Hamlet, Faust. Yes, perhaps we can discuss about the correct meaning of the word typ in German, but I think that the use he makes of this word is that one is opposite to the individual. That is in the text. But I agree completely on the fact that that the individuality of the aesthetic consciousness is more fundamental than the question of the individuality of the human being as represented by art.
Yes. If I may, because this third type of subject has a systematic position, in Cohen's system of philosophy. If you neglect the subject as an individual, you destroy the whole system, because the whole system, all the three directions, poor cognition, poor will, and poor feeling, they must have their own subjects. It's a demand of the system. And so if you neglect this subject as an individual, you will destroy the whole system. So I think it should stay. I'm not very conscious of this paper on religion, because it's not just can't remember what exactly is there, but I know well this the aesthetic of poor feeling, and so I think it's of course a systematic meaning of this model of subject, and you can substitute the subject through the type, but otherwise, yeah, the system will not work. So, sorry, it's a very interesting discussion. So I discussed very with pleasure. Yeah, thank you very much.
For the second question, on the contrary, I don't agree that there is Einfühlung or empathy in Cohen. Cohen takes I can give you the page as 185 in the first volume of the Aesthetic Design in the Fields. He takes a distance from the aesthetic of empathy because he states that the problem of aesthetic is not Einfühlung, but Erfüllung. And Cohen, R means production. So yes. The distance it takes against the aesthetic of Einfühlung is that, according to him, Einfühlung presupposes that there is the subject, there is the object, and the subject finds himself in the object. But the problem, according to his idealism, is that we have to speak of Erfüllung. So this Füllung produces both the object and the subject. There is not a subject and the object that are given preliminary, more fundamentally, than this Füllung. So I don't know why Bakhtin, in one of his books, I don't know, in Italian is l'autore e l'eroe. Yes. The author and the hero. I don't know what is the Russian or the German or English title, but he counts Cohen among the authors of the Aesthetik der Einführung. But I never really understand. I have never really understood why, because in Cohen there is a clear distance from Liszt and the Aesthetik der Einführung. So, okay, there is a Erfüllung, not Einfühlung, but I think also that Cohen would not consider this Einfühlung as a knowledge.
Oh, thank you very much. It's very interesting because it's absolutely correct. You are absolutely correct with this Erfüllung, yeah. But it's a concept, or it's a characterizing of this aesthetic activity, yeah. What are you doing as an artist, yeah? It's what are you doing is Erfüllung, yeah. You create something, yeah, through your feeling of aesthetic love, yeah. So, but nevertheless, what is a kind, Erfüllung is a kind of aesthetic activity, yeah. So as an artist, but what is your kind of knowledge of your aesthetic object? For example, if you create an image of I don't know, of one hero, yeah. So you have to to have knowledge of it. And it's a critical point of Bakhtin. Bakhtin says, yes, for Cohen, the individual is still an object, yeah, it's still an object, yeah, and so, but not a not in another subject, not in another consciousness. So it's a critical point, yeah. But I think Bakhtin is also, yeah, probably it's, yeah, I don't know how to say. It's a point of discussion, yeah. Is really an individual still an object for Cohen, or I think there is one place somewhere where he speaks about this typical aesthetic cognition, and in this in this case, I believe, I'm not sure, I have to check. It's appears that this word Einfühlung. So and when yeah, okay, when it's true, then Bakhtin's model that an individual for Cohen is still object and not a subject, not another consciousness, it will be then false. Okay, it's very, very interesting. Just thank you very much.
Thanks, Maya, for your replic, for your discussion, and for your question, of course. Have you any more question or replic or meaning about this theme? So I want to ask, I would like to ask about the problem of the love feeling, problem of love in aesthetic and in religion. We have two understanding of individual in aesthetic and in religion, and you said about these differences, but I would like to that you focus on these differences between because Cohen's made the love like the basis of aesthetic consciousness, and in Christian tradition the Christian religion is a love religion. Yeah, it is the main instrument for the change the man. If the man loves, he may do what you want, because he made but he don't bad, and if we say about love only in the aesthetic fields, I think we diminish the meaning of love. What do you say about?
So yes, I've told that the distinction between aesthetic love and religious love is the main aim of Cohen in his chapter about religion and aesthetics in der Begriff der Religion. This is a curious thing, because all the chapters of this book, there is a chapter about religion and logic, religion and ethics, religion and psychology. Every one of these chapters try to state to institute a positive relation between religion and in a part of the system. In the chapter of about religion and aesthetics, no, there is a different problem. On the contrary, the problem is to defend the autonomy of aesthetic from religion and of a religion from aesthetic. In a certain way, we can see that whereas in Aesthetik des reinen Gefühls, Cohen is worried to defend the autonomy of art and of aesthetics from religion, on the opposite and complementary side, in der Begriff der Religion, he is worried to defend the autonomy of religion from aesthetics, from art and from aesthetics. The reason is probably a contingent historical situation. His polemic task, his polemic aim is his polemic target is a conception that founds religion, that founds both religion and art on feelings, both religion and art on love, and so it makes religion a kind of art. The figures of this kind of concept in the history of philosophy are, according to Cohen, Schleiermacher, but also his friend Paul Nathorp. Mm-hmm. And so he had an enemy in his own house. So it was very concerned about this necessity to distinguish the love that is a fundament of art from the love that is fundament of religion. Mm-hmm. His solution is that love of art, aesthetic love, pure love, is the pure love that produces the human being as individual endowed with universal value, without any correlation with God. On the contrary, the love of the religious love is a love of correlation. You know, it is known. There are three kind of correlation: of love correlation on religion, human, God to man, man to God, and man with Mitmensch, mit the other man. But to deal with more specific with religious love, for me now it's perhaps a bit difficult for me. I'm not so specialist of that, but I have to say that yes, clearly the main difference is that pure love is pure, so it is a productive love. It produces the human being, and it is independent from the correlation with God. This is the main difference.
Thanks. Yeah. We have time to think about this very difficult part of Cohen's philosophy, the problem of unity and individuality, aesthetic and religion. This problem, this differentiation between all parts of human being and human essence and God, correlation and correlation and the dialogue between man and God, man and meat-mensch, and so on. It's very more different ways of unity and differentiation, and it's our thing as like ergebnis and process, like result and process, always in ways to other results, question and question answer question and so on. It's very difficult to end this process. Thanks. Anyone has the question and necessary to say anything about these problems?
Maybe I have a question, but
Лера, ты, да?
Да.
Громче.
Okay, so I think that you answered a little bit on my question, but I want to see if I understood right what you said. So can we put aesthetic and religion in some kind of relation where we can see human being as a type or as individuality according of which position the human takes, such as a subject or object of art or religion? Is individuality and type relates to one another as some kind of hierarchy, where type is just a wide field from where we take the elements of individuality as something that is not a type or something else? So what's that system? I saw it like the system where everything is correlated to one another, where religion can be an art too. Is it right?
I don't know if I ever understood all the question. If I don't answer, you ask again, please. So surely there is a positive relation between art and religion, even for Cohen, and this is expressed by Cohen about above all in his minor writing, we can say, not in his main book about, not in his main books about aesthetics and about religion. In his main books about aesthetics and about religion, he is clearly more concerned to avoid confusion and to avoid a conception of a dependence of art from religion, or vice versa, of religion from art. He is more concerned to defend the independence of religion and art. However, he wrote some essays about lyric poetry in the Bible, about the style of the prophetic books, and some reflections, many writings about the Jewish religious poetry, and so on. This question, I think, is a bit different from the one of the individual and of the type. The problem of the individual and of the type has an importance with reference to an interpretation by Franz Rosenzweig, according to which the fact that Cohen didn't complete his system of philosophy with his psychology, but he wrote instead 2 books about philosophy of religion, is caused by Cohen's need to deepen the question of individuality. We have to notice that in the original project of Cohen's system of philosophy, there was not a specific part of religious philosophy. Religion or philosophy of religion are not a part of Cohen's system of philosophy in its project. And when he writes his 2 books of philosophy of religion, he doesn't present them as a 4th part of the system. Philosophy of religion is not the 4th part of the system, even in his book about philosophy of religion. The first of these books try to explain the place of religion in the system, but not as an autonomous part. So certainly the positive relation between aesthetics and religion is present in these books, but it is not perhaps strictly considered with strictly connected with reflections on the type. The reflection on the type can only help us to find a difference between aesthetic and religion, more than a positive cooperation between them, I think. I don't know if it is an answer.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. Have you any question more? I think that we have today very productive and interesting discussion, and it give us new impulse for our distinguishes and for our thinking about these fundamental problems of the philosophy, and especially for the philosophical system of Cohen. It's like planet, very bright, deep, and very important for us to understanding these ideas, the new approach to our today's deals and targets. Yeah, I say thanks for our lectures, for our guests, Eцио Gamba. I hope that it is not a last meeting together, and perhaps in future we will say about another problem in Cohen's ideas, and I say thank you for attention, all our participants, and I hope that we will meeting in our seminars in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks and goodbye. Ciao.
Ciao.
Buona serata.
Grazie. Ciao.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.